The barbell hip thrust exercise is a hardcore major glute exercise that should probably be in any glute building program. Whenever you get set up initially for this exercise, you need to make sure you can actually do a bodyweight hip thrust first and can control the range of motion before you start adding in a barbell. So I am using a short foam bench here, and this is super convenient. I've got this placed like middle of the back or like lower shoulder blades. If you're using a standard bench, it's just a little bit tougher of a setup because you've got to wiggle up the bench, but it is possible to make it work. If you don't have a trapezoid, just like a regular foam box. So those are going to be super helpful. This is about 12 to 14 inches off of the floor. So when you get set up, shimmy yourself back so that your tailbone is in contact with the bench. So see, now my middle back is actually in contact here, and that's going to be my fulcrum rather than trying to pivot like on my shoulders or on my neck. So don't let yourself start coming down like this where you've got your neck on the bench. That is not safe, and you're not going to be able to lift as much weight. When you do your initial setup, you'll want to start with your feet in a good hip thrust position. So that takes a little bit of fiddling with, but usually it's feet about a shoulder width wide or hips width wide. Toes will be turned out at least a little bit. If you've got wider hips, you may have to turn them out a little bit more, but at least 35, 45 degrees. And then you're going to keep your knees pressed out the whole time as you're lifting. So don't let your knees fall in like this. You want to keep the knees pressed out just because of the angle that the glutes actually attach. The other thing is the distance of your feet. So if you're too far out, when you lift, you'll actually engage a lot of calves and hamstrings, which I guess is fine if you're trying to do that. But if we're trying to engage the glutes, we want the feet to be in a little bit so that as you lift, your shins end up just about perpendicular with the floor. And you'll have to experiment with that a little bit. You also don't want to be too close because then you're just stretching the quads and you're not getting enough hip extension to actually engage your glutes. So not too close either. They should be right about there. So once you've got all of that squared away, you're going to take your barbell, and I would recommend placing a squat sponge or some kind of protection around the barbell because as it gets heavier, it's really going to dig into your hips and it does not feel good. So a squat sponge is a great idea. You could use like a bunch of towels. You could use, some people will actually use like those AirX pads underneath it. Some kind of padding is going to be a good idea. You'll get yourself set up in your hip thrust position. Place the hands on the barbell. So if you're not comfortable with doing a hip thrust without having your hands like on the floor or your elbows on the bench, then you don't need to be doing this. But once you get comfortable with that, hands should be on whatever implement you're using. You're going to lift your hips, and we're trying to reach full hip extension. So rather than just coming up part of the way and coming back down, we're trying to lift the hips so high that we end up with almost a straight line from the front of the knee through the thigh, past the front of the hip, all the way to the shoulder. So this is going to be ideal position. So there's some other things you can work on as well that helps with hip extension. Sometimes if you make it too shouldery and you start slinging the head back, you end up with your head going back and your butt stays down, and you end up with this like arch position in the spine. So you don't want this where you're like lifting your chest and not your hips. Instead, you want your rib cage to actually stay down and your abs to stay engaged so that as you come up and back, everything moves as one solid unit. So we're not this way. There is some theory about where you look with your eyes. There are some folks who would have you keep your eyes straight ahead and thrust that way. So that is an option to teach you how to get that tailbone tucked under and to keep your rib cage knitted down. But once you get really good at that, if you need to, you can actually allow the head to rock back and the eyes to come up because it just helps you get a little bit more range of hip extension, especially once you're one solid unit. That's actually how I prefer to do it. It's also safer, in my opinion, on your lower back. So you'll have your barbell on your hips. We've got rib cage knitted down, feet are in the right position, turned out, knees are pressed out. We're gonna lift, make sure your core is nice and braced so your rib cage is down, and we're gonna lift, come up to the top of each rep, and you'll do all your reps just like that. And as you get stronger, don't be afraid to add on plates. Using bumper plates like this is actually really convenient because it gives you more space to get underneath the bar. So you'll hold that in position, and then lift, and your butt will get super strong.